Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk today. The topic is monosyllables and other signs. And it's about the root cause of why we stay in relationships even when we know we need to go. And I was writing about relationships where you feel like you have to walk on eggshells or, make yourself small in order to be safe. And I don't know, I think a lot of people can look in the rearview mirror and, find at least one of those kinds of relationships, whether it was romantic or otherwise. Sometimes it happens in a friendship too, where you're kind of becoming close to someone and you're realizing there are certain topics that are not going to be okay or certain situations that are not going to be okay. Anytime that you feel like you have to dim your light or watch your step, that's a red flag, right? That's something you want to try to figure out, okay, what's happening here? And for me, that was a really prevalent symptom of more than one relationship that I was in my 20s and 30s, as I was really trying to understand myself and do some serious healing and try to figure out what was driving me or what was motivating me or stopping me, scaring me, all of that deep work that I think all of us need to do at a certain point. If we want to be happy and we want to be at ease, we've got to kind of figure out what's happening underneath the surface, especially if you identify patterns that are causing you pain. And in my relationships, I was certainly noticing that, that I ended up with my heart broken, that I would feel like I had tried as hard as I could, in some cases really bending over backwards or trying to be perfect for this person in order to earn love. And so that's usually what's at the root of this kind of interaction. And it is commonly when you have attachment styles, the pairing of an anxiously attached person with an avoidant person, with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, that is a painful pairing that generally does not work out too well for either party. It's really, really painful for the person who's anxiously attached. And it's also painful for the person who, has a big fear of intimacy to be asked to show up in ways that are just highly, highly uncomfortable. And that is the kind of interaction I found myself in again and again. And so, eventually you've got to ask yourself why. What is it about this dynamic that is somehow compelling to me? Why does this pattern, why does this situation keep showing up in my life? It's not a coincidence, right? If it happens once and then you're okay, lesson learned, that's those are red flags I'm not going to ignore next time, great. But if it's a thing where 2, 3, 4 times you're wow, every relationship that I enter ends up feeling this way, where I feel like I'm chasing love or chasing approval or fighting for any kind of sensitivity or respect or consistent loving behavior, kind behavior, got to start looking at what's driving me, not really what's happening with the other person. And that is what happened for me. And when I'm writing these essays, I again want to say, it's usually an amalgamation of a number of relationships. It's not usually one person. Sometimes there's sort of one person who comes to the forefront that I'm, remembering, but a lot of the time it's a combination of people, and when you can look at when you can look back at relationships and see striking similarities across the board, that you found like a pattern that is worth exploring. And that's what happened for me eventually, is like I tried to figure out I went on a kind of like a relationship hiatus and tried to figure out what's happening inside of me that is drawing me toward people who really are not going to be able to do anything but let me down, hurt me, what's going on, because it's not about them, at a certain point. And that's something that I was writing about in the essay as well, is that the person that sort of came to the forefront was someone who would just kind of like draw me in and then cut me down, and it was really painful. And it'd be the kind of thing where like he would start a conversation and I would get really like excited to have his attention, and then when I would enthusiastically sort of enter the conversation pretty early in, he would then decide he was done with the conversation. And if I didn't read the signs that he was done, and they were pretty obvious, like he'd pick up the remote or turn away from me or grunt, and that's why I called the essay Monosyllables and Other Signs. If I didn't then stop talking and stop engaging, even if I was like midway through a sentence, it would get worse and worse, and eventually he'd go for the jugular. And it was painful. It's not pleasant. What I began to realize when I kind of stepped back and just decided to figure out what's happening, because I did not want to be, I really wanted connection. I did not want the kind of connection that was going to lead to heartbreak. Who wants that, right? Nobody. So I was trying to figure out what was going on with me. And family of origin stuff is always a good place to check if you find that you are repeating patterns in your life that aren't serving you, and if you find that you are attracted to a particular dynamic that is ultimately going to cause you pain. It's good to just try to figure out, is there something familiar in this dynamic? Is there something in this experience that feels like home to me? And a lot of the time, you're probably going to find the answers yes. And that was certainly the case for me. And I was writing about the experience I had growing up in an alcoholic household. My mom was an alcoholic, and I adored my mother. And it wasn't just the alcoholism for us. I craved her attention and her time and her interest. I wanted those things desperately. And she was a single mom. My parents split when I was 4, and my mom went right to work. And she was working as a secretary all day long, and then she was going on dates a lot throughout the week, because I think this was the 70s, and I think in her mind, her next best move was to find a husband. And so she was on the hunt for that. And so I was going back and forth, 4 nights at my mom's, 3 nights at my dad's, and then 3 nights at my dad's, 4 nights. It would switch every week. I would do 4 nights or 3 nights alternating. And when I would go back to my mom's, all I wanted was to spend time with her, and she was almost always going on a date. Maybe once a week she would be home with me, but most of the time not. And so I was always kind of like trying to be interesting enough or good enough, or just like I was trying to figure out ways to get her to want to spend time with me and make it be fun for her, because she was tired. She'd come home at the end of the day and she was exhausted. And sometimes on those nights where she would stay home, maybe we'd start watching something and she would fall asleep on the couch, and I would just stand really close to her and watch her sleep, and then she'd wake up and be upset with me. Like, I remember this, I'd startle her, because of course it's startling. like a little person standing there 2 feet away from you, staring at you while you sleep. It's definitely startling. But she would then tell me she wasn't sleeping; she was resting her eyes. But she was sleeping, and I'm sure it's not easy to be 28 with a 4-year-old. Her mom had just passed away. Her mother was her best friend. Her dad passed away when she was 13. She didn't have a support system that she was willing to lean on very much. She had her brother and his wife, my Aunt Louise, who, if you read my stuff and follow along here, you've heard her name before. She's absolute, just the most loving person ever. And my 4 cousins, and she would eventually drop me off there for the weekends. But when she first split with my dad, she didn't do that. And I don't know if there was some shame around the divorce or what had happened. I think that there was a 20-year age difference between my mom and my dad. My dad was 20 years older. My dad left his family, his wife and 2 kids, had an affair with my mother and ended up marrying her. So I think there was already a lot of drama and judgment about the whole way this had gone down. And then they were together for 4 years, and then they had me, and then like when she was pregnant, things started to fall apart. And I don't think she wanted anyone to know that. My mother was someone who kept her struggles very close to the vest, as she would say. And so I imagine, I don't know for sure, but I think that part of the reason she didn't lean on her brother and my Aunt Louise right away after the split was because there was some shame or some embarrassment or some difficulty in facing the fact that like this marriage had failed. And so it was just, there was a lot there that I think I can, as a grown woman and somebody who did the single mom thing myself for 8 years, I really have grown in compassion for my mother so much over the years. And just things I've understood even since she passed at the end of 2021 that I didn't understand or realize when she was alive. I have a lot of compassion for her and empathy and, absolute forgiveness. But that doesn't mean that the things that happened in my childhood didn't have a huge impact on me or didn't shape the person that I have become. And that is an area of fascination for me, for all of us, is like how much of who we are is shaped by who our parents were, even in the ways that we've moved away from their behavior. Like that's still shaping us, even if it's that we're like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And so I'm going to move in a totally different direction. That's still a reaction to who your parents were. And so that fascinates me. And that's a lot what my memoir is about, and I really tried to capture that in the essay because there were really similar dynamics in the situation, not just with this person who, came to the forefront as I was writing, but in a number of my relationships that were fraught, that were just so painful and really devastating at the time. That dynamic was there of me trying to earn the love or earn this person's interest, their attention, their kindness. I wanted to be cherished, and I wanted to be loved, and I wanted to feel, treasured. And that just wasn't happening in a consistent way. And it was painful. It really was like salt in the old wound, and made me feel like there's something broken at my core or something like unlovable about me that most people can't see, but if you get close enough, then you see it. That was the story I had in my head, because I was like, well, my own mother couldn't love me. And so if your own mother can't love you, then there's something wrong with you. And it took me a really long time, and therapy and yoga and all of it, journaling, like a whole bunch of different modalities to really understand, and time too, and my own growth as a person, to recognize that the broken part was in my mom. It really wasn't in me. And what was broken in her was broken from life and from her own disappointments and her own heartbreaks and her own times where, she was betrayed or just just let down in these really profound ways. And for whatever reason, and I think I know what those reasons are also now more clearly since her passing, but it was a theory of mine for a really long time that she blamed me for the end of her marriage to my dad because he started cheating on her when she got pregnant with me, in her 7th month of pregnancy. And I don't know how conscious or subconscious that feeling was in her. She told me many times that they were blissfully happy for the first 4 years of the marriage, and then, she got pregnant, and then everything kind of fell apart. So I don't think it was that buried. I think she kind of knew it. She was aware of it enough to share that with me. But when she would drink, that rage, I think she would unleash on me. I was like the target. And I do think that there was probably also, like, her dad died very suddenly when she was 13, and my dad was 20 years older. I think it probably tapped some of that old stuff in her, that old abandonment, those feelings, that really primal stuff. And I think that her rage about losing my dad and sort of feeling like that was because of me, I also became the target for her feelings of abandonment around her dad. Like, this stuff is deep, there are kind of rivers of trauma that are running through. And if you are not aware of that, they wreak havoc. You end up getting thrown into the rocks. Whereas if you can bring that stuff to the surface and really look at it and understand yourself and understand where you're coming from and maybe other people's trauma, especially the people who raised you, it helps. It kind of takes the sting out of it, where you're like not taking it personally anymore. You're realizing this river was running through before I showed up, and it's going to continue running long after I go. And it's not about me. It's not that there's anything lacking in me. It's that my mom didn't get any help. She was somebody who was so proud. She had so much pride, and really couldn't admit that she was wrong. I can count maybe on one finger, definitely on one hand, the number of times my mom ever said I'm sorry to me. So she wasn't someone who was going to go and seek help because she wasn't ever wrong about anything. And I remember when I was 17, I started going to Al-Anon meetings because I realized her alcoholism had really just had such a profound effect on me. And I remember being in a meeting where someone said something like, "Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?" And I thought, oh, that is brilliant, and I'm gonna say that to her, and that's gonna she's gonna have that light bulb moment, And I went home. I was so excited. I, of course, was hiding that I was going to Al-Anon meetings because she would have been furious, because we didn't even talk about her alcoholism inside the house. This was not an acknowledged thing. I was the one person saying, "I think you have a problem." It's not normal to need to get drunk to the point where you are slurring and struggling to walk multiple times a week. That's not a good sign. And I was told over and over again, she was a social drinker, she was fine, I was sensitive, it was my perception, and on and on. So I was hiding the fact that I was going to Al-Anon meetings. And Al-Anon meetings are for family members of alcoholics, in case that's new to you. I could never have said, "Oh, I'm going to Al-Anon meetings," because it would have been why? I'm not an alcoholic. So, but I still wanted to share this gem, and I really thought it would make a difference. So I, went home, and the first opportunity I had, I said, "Mom, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?" And she said, "Being right makes me happy." And I was just crushed, I thought I had her. And I did a lot of that. I did a lot of bargaining and telling, well, I want to spend time with you, but if you're going to be drinking, I don't want to be around that. And then I would, she would say, okay. And then I'd meet her for lunch. This was long after I was out of the house, and she'd order a glass of Chardonnay and I'd leave. I don't want to be around this, and bargaining doesn't work. And you get into this mindset of why is when you love an addict, right? Like, why is the drug more important than me? Why is the numbing agent more important? And that's what you think as a kid, certainly. That, for me, it was like the Chardonnay was more important to her than I was. And, if that's the math that you're doing as a kid, it makes you feel like I'm not even more important than a drink. Like, I must not be important at all. And so all the things I had done in my childhood to try to be interesting or funny or smart or perfect or, like starving myself and like every other thing, being a straight A student and, watching my brother, but not just watching him, like making it perfect so that when she came home, not only was like my brother in bed and asleep and the house was perfectly clean and everything was in the dishwasher and my homework was done, it was never enough. It was never enough. That's how I felt. And so it's not a surprise that I went out into my adult relationships and replayed a lot of that. And if you don't go back and try to figure out that original wiring, you're going to keep playing it out. It's not that hard to understand. And so that's what I did. And you might think logically, like, well, I left both my mom's and my dad's houses. And, my dad had a whole bunch of other stuff going on that was equally like painful, and there's just tons of gaslighting, a lot of gaslighting everywhere. And so I found out from a teacher when I was in 10th grade that I would have enough credits by the end of 11th grade to graduate if I went ahead and like took the SATs and the achievement test early. And the idea of getting out of both houses a year early was appealing to me. It was painful. I was really struggling. I, really struggled with anxiety and depression and just, going back and forth and going from one house full of secrets and difficulties to another. It was tough, and so this teacher sort of gave me a roadmap to get out. And there were other reasons. There was another, we're going to get into another topic now if I go too far, but I've written about it. There was another teacher in the school, a male teacher. I had a major crush on him, and he gave me every indication that it was mutual, and I thought we were going to be together. So it was like another reason to get out of the house early. It ended up not being the case, but there were a lot of things going on in my 16-year-old brain. And so that's what 16-year-old brain. So that's what I did. I like worked really, really hard to get out early. I did it, finished, I did the SATs and the achievement tests and the AP test. I did all the things. I applied to schools. This was long before parents were involved in every aspect of all of that, or there were people you could hire to, write your essays or whatever people do now. Not everybody does that. We certainly didn't do that. My son is actively in that part of life. But the point is, like, I did all that stuff because it was a road to freedom, a way out of the kind of insanity that I was going back and forth dealing with. And so you would think if you work that hard to get out of that environment, you're certainly not going to recreate it, but you would be wrong. It's very common. Maybe not everybody, certainly not everybody. There's no formula for this stuff, but many, many, many people repeat what they knew. They recreate, they don't do it on purpose. Nobody's like consciously like, oh, that was really painful, let me do that again. It's just that we are pulled toward the familiar, like, the devil, right? And not just that, it's not just that it's familiar, it's also that the wiring is set up to experience love as something you need to earn, love as something that is sometimes withheld, love as something that can be used against you. A person you love as someone who might go for your jugular on a regular basis. That is how I grew up. And that is what I understood. And that's what I repeated for a number of years as I was trying to make my way. And it wasn't until I got to that point of like, okay, that's it. Like, I'm done with that. I can't I'm not going to make it if I keep having these experiences. Like, I don't have it in me, I'm too tender-hearted, like, frankly, like, to keep going through this kind of heartache. It was devastating. Those relationships, like the one that I was writing about, they just like did me in. I was really not okay. And the relationship would become the central part of my life. Like, whatever else I was doing, the person I was with was always coming first. And that's not, when you're like 20, like whatever, even 17, 18, and 20, it's like you got a lot of things to figure out, and that's not where you want your priorities to be, but I didn't know that. And I was really actively trying to create a happy family. That was something I really wanted to do. So it took me a number of heartaches, a few of them anyway, before I was like, okay, I need some help. Like, I need some help with this, and I need to figure out why what's going on with me. And I'm a big fan of therapy. I do think you have to be very careful. You got to vet carefully. There are great therapists, just like there are great writers and great yoga teachers and great, there's all kind, but you've got to like vet and be sure that you're working with someone really, really solid. And you probably want to try to figure out as much as you can anyway, like, does this person seem happy? Do they seem at ease? Because there's a lot of people that are attracted toward healing modalities because they themselves had a lot of healing to do. And sometimes people start advising other people before they've really worked through their own stuff adequately. And so you just want to, you want to be really careful. But I am a huge fan of therapy with a good, brilliant therapist. And also for me, yoga was like a huge part of because with therapy, I found the intellectual part. Like, I could have told you, even in my early 20s, and maybe sooner than that, what was going on with me. I started going to therapy when I was 13. And so I could have told you, like, well, my parents split when I was 4, and my mom took me to a farm and left me there, and like everyone I knew disappeared all at once. So I have like major abandonment issues. And, I could have told you everything. And my mom, my mom's an alcoholic, but she won't admit it. And it's just, I could have gone down the line. My dad took me on dates with him all the time and cheated on everybody. And like, I could have told you everything that was driving me, but I couldn't overcome it until I started to work on things in a somatic way, in a visceral, like in my body, on my yoga mat. And that might sound like, well, how can you work on stuff, from like a childhood where, one of your parents was an alcoholic? It's about the feeling. So if you have fear, you get to be on your mat working through your fear. And the fear might show up, like, for some people with inversions or arm balances. They're afraid of falling on their faces. That's a good, healthy fear, or a fear of breaking your neck. But if you work slowly and carefully, and again, you vet and you are working with a good teacher, you're not gonna, break your neck if you're being instructed properly. You're working through that fear. And you're getting to have the experience in your body and on your mat of, okay, I'm afraid, but I'm going to like work with that. I'm not going to let the fear stop me. I'm going to work through it. And that's a muscle that you're developing. And then you get to like take that off the mat and into your life. And so I did a lot of that stuff for years. That was a lot of my practice, was just trying to figure out, first of all, trusting myself and trusting my own perception because of all the gaslighting. I had to start in a really basic, like, okay, I feel like I'm in a 90-degree bend. Let me actually put my hands on my body and figure out if my front leg is in a 90-degree bend. Like, is it? Isn't it? Is my perception correct? Is what I think happening really happening, or other? So that's how, you can really work with your feelings in your body and start to develop that confidence that, okay, I can move. So I can be afraid and I can still do things even if I feel afraid. Boundaries, right? Like, you go into a pose and your hamstring starts saying like, eek, stop, please. Do you respect that? Do you stop, or do you push through? Or, like, what, you get to really know yourself in this quiet kind of like personal laboratory. You get to see what your tendencies are. So that whole thing of like how you do anything is how you do everything. So all your tendencies show up with you on your mat, and you get to kind of like work it out and figure it out and keep breathing and keep developing compassion for yourself, patience, awareness, your own presence, your own curiosity about your process, and things start to transform. And that's what happened for me. I just got to a point where I was like, enough. Like, enough. First of all, I'm bored of all these stories. Like, I'm bored of, I don't want to be blaming my parents for the rest of my life. Like, if I'm not happy and I'm 25, 26 years old, it's on me now. It's not on them. It's my life. I'm the one calling the shots now. So if I'm making choices that lead to my own pain, I have to take ownership of that now, and figure it out. And so that became really exciting for me. I stopped chasing happiness, and I started chasing like, what is the truth here? And that gives you agency, right? That gives you power, because it's not about other people. And that's what I was saying in the essay, is that at a certain point, it wasn't about this person that I was writing about and the painful things he was saying. It wasn't about him. It was about me and the fact that I was staying, that I was being treated badly and I wasn't leaving. And I didn't have the self-esteem and the self-respect and the just the care to get myself together and leave. That was the issue. And that was the issue that needed solving. Like, why don't I have enough regard for my own well-being and my own heart to gather myself up and remove myself from this situation or make the other person leave? Like, what's happening and what do I need to do to develop that self-regard, And I'm really happy to say, it's been 30 plus years of my life, it gets better, like if you start to really pay attention and pursue that kind of investigation and stay with it, there's so much healing that's available, and you can rewire your own system, and then those dynamics are no longer fascinating to you. The kind of person that would intentionally be unkind to you, you're like, I don't want to spend time with someone like that. I don't even want to go on one date, I'm going to leave. Like, if that's the vibe I'm getting here, even 20 minutes into dinner, I'm out. So it's a relief, right? Because you're like, oh, I actually care about myself, and I care about whether I'm okay or not. And, that's not selfish. I think that a lot of us grew up, and girls and women in particular, of a certain, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I'm 53. So I was taught, to be a good girl, you have to take care of everyone around you. That's your job. And your own needs are we're not talking about those. Those are kind of pushed to the side, pushed down, whatever. They're not part of the equation. Your job is to be compliant, to be polite, to be helpful. There were very clear expectations when I was a child growing up of what was acceptable behavior and what was not acceptable. And I was allowed to be happy. I was allowed to be silly at my dad's. Silliness to a point was okay at my mom's, but not if it got too silly or too loud or whatever. I was allowed to be serious, focused, helpful, but I wasn't allowed to be sad or angry. Those feelings would put constraints on the adults around me. And my mother in particular, did not want to experience guilt of any kind or feelings that she wasn't getting it right. So I wasn't really allowed to be sad. I definitely was not allowed to be angry. And my dad, it was even worse in some ways, because if I was sad, he would then sob in my arms. It's oh, great, that's really helpful. Thanks, Dad. So I got the message, to push that stuff that was uncomfortable for the people around me. I push that to the side. It doesn't mean it goes away. It's still there. It's just you're editing it out, and you can get to a point in your life where you've edited out your feelings so much you don't even know how you're feeling anymore. And that certainly happened for me. And so that was a big part of my own journey over the years is just like figuring out, how do I even feel right now? How do I feel about this? And then it would be, okay, I know how I feel. Am I right? Or like, am I taking this the wrong way? I didn't trust myself. So there's a lot of stuff. I had to start over and revamp the entire system, but I did it. It can be done. And it's not just for you that you're doing this work. It's for everyone around you. Because when you do it, you kind of give other people permission to do it, and a roadmap. Like, people around you can see, like, oh, I don't have to take treatment that doesn't feel good. Or, maybe like it isn't always going to be this way. Also, when you are beside yourself and you're feeling less than, or you're walking on eggshells, you hate yourself. You hate yourself for it. And there's an energy to that. When you're walking around the world, if you are not feeling like you are a valuable, wave in the ocean here, you're not going to be doing all the things you could be doing for the people around you and for the world around you, because you're stuck in your own story. You're stuck in your own heartache. You don't have the available energy to extend yourself. And there are going to be times in life, no matter how wonderful each one of us is or how much work we've done, where things happen, and you got to give yourself grace, and you've got to give yourself space and time, and not worry about anything except surviving and getting through. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying, as a general rule, if you are plagued by insecurity and self-doubt and your own, you doubt your own self-worth, you're going to have to figure that out at a certain point if you want to be showing up in this world and really, like shining the way that you could and contributing the way that you could. So, I hope that this is a helpful topic. I heard from a lot of people underneath the essay who have either been in that kind of relationship or currently in that kind of relationship. It's so painful. And if you need help, I do really try to be easy to find. I certainly know how to offer support. And that is the reason that I do everything I do. It's the reason that I write. It's the reason that I teach. It's the reason that I have the podcast. It's just like, I know what it feels like to feel so uncomfortable in your own skin and so tired of your old stories and so stuck, and it can be really frustrating for people who love people who are on the inside of this kind of relationship. I don't know how many of you have people in your life where you're like, this person's so amazing. Like, they're such a good person. They're so smart. They're so insightful. They're so fun. Why do they keep getting into relationships that are so awful, or they're stuck in this relationship, and I keep telling them, like, get out, you deserve so much better. People can't get out until the moment they are ready to get out. They just can't, do it, no matter how great your advice is or how much you love them, or, it's just to know that the best thing we can do is just show up and be like, hey, I get it. I'm here. I've been where you are. I love you. I think you're amazing. And when you're ready to make a change, I will be there. I'll be there with the car running in the driveway, ready to go when you're ready to leave. And we'll go and celebrate. But it's tough. I know that it can be mind-bending to watch someone who's amazing just be stuck in a relationship. And there are a lot of really wonderful people who get stuck. And it's because this stuff is deep, it's deep. And so just to have compassion for yourself, compassion for other people, no shame around it, no judgment around it, just it's okay. It's part of your process, and it's part of your, your wiring that you need to get really familiar with so you can rewire. And I do hope this was helpful. And I will see you next time. Take care out there.